Okay, welcome everyone to the third part of this session, this online seminar session, The Many Faces of Anti-Semitism. I'm happy that you're with us tonight once again. Tonight, we've got young researchers from the Technical University of Berlin, from the Institute of Language and Communication, Daniel Miehling. And Daniel, first of all, I'd like to say welcome. It's lovely that you're here with us today and take your valuable time out of the day to be here and present your research. I can say that you have just finished writing your PhD thesis. You've just printed it and you just let us know that you're going to submit it tomorrow, and we're going to talk about that thesis. Daniel Miehling, I'm just going to make a few settings here. Daniel, you did some research on the topic of anti-Semitic publication on Twitter. It's now called X, but it used to be called Twitter. But you talk about Twitter because when you were working on that topic, it was still called Twitter. And Daniel Miehling, he took a great and detailed look on anti-Semitic messages, how they're disseminated on the media. And I think social media does play a major role in spreading anti-Semitism. And Daniel Miehling also looked at which kind of different groups spread anti-Semitism. This is why the presentation is also called, we've got a few from different time zones here. So it is called Who Says What About Jews and Israel on Twitter. And I think this is something that's going to give us some insights about what this calls and what kind of imagination patterns that are used to disseminate anti-Semitism. We're going to learn about that today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Is going to talk about for about 30 minutes, and then we have our regular Q&A session. Thanks once again. And one more thing, we have at ISGAP, we have the Institute for Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy also provides its summer institution this year, where it is about people exchanging how to deal with anti-Semitism on a university level. That we still have some seats left. If you're interested in participating, please visit our webpage. And then I would like to give the floor to Daniel Miehling. We're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much, Mark, for the lovely introduction. Before I start, I first of all like to share my screen. Okay, then you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation, right? Great. Okay, so before I'm going to get started with my presentation, Mike Neugroschel quickly introduced me already, but for some of you, it might be interesting to get some information about my research interests. In addition to my PhD thesis, which I've written over the past 3 years, I have been working on and researching the topic of online anti-Semitism on Twitter for about 6 years. As a part of the research lab Social Media and Hate at the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism at Indiana University. And in recent years, or rather in the course of my doctorate, I have also been increasingly concerned with methodological questions relating to the problem of recording anti-Semitic content on Web 2.2. For example, which methods, whether qualitative or quantitative, can be used to record anti-Semitic content as precisely as possible its various forms of manifestation despite rapid language change processes. However, since today we will be dealing exclusively with discourses on the mainstream platform X, which are primarily characterized by sociological questions, such as who are the actors who disseminate anti-Semitic content, on which topics do they increasingly appear, and when can increased activity be detected. I will only partially address the data collection and analysis methods at one point or another in today's presentation. However, if you have any further questions on that topic, I will be happy to answer them in the discussion following the presentation. Before I start with my presentation, I want to say a few things about the 7th of October. In the course of the Islamic attack on Israel, there was a significant rise in anti-Semitism on the web 2.0. On X, it happened, amongst other things, through the spread of hashtags with direct Nazi comparisons, such as hashtag Israeli New Nazi or Gaza Holocaust. And at times, they trended on and beginning of the attack at about 500,000 tweets per day. And even if it was an exceptional situation, these developments in recent years show that the internet plays a decisive role in giving space to inhumane ideologies. Another example that I should mention here is the massive dissemination of content in pro-Palestinian tweets that cultivated the red triangle emoticon, a now prominent symbol that marks soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces and appear in anti-Israeli violence videos in which the killing of Jews is glorified. However, I must note at this point that the material discussed in lecture today doesn't really talk about the terrorist attack of the 7th of October because it was back then, didn't have the data. We don't have enough data at the moment. And I only going to illuminate developments from the past few years. Before going into the presentation, just to give you a short overview that shows you what we're going to talk about. At the beginning, I will present data material and briefly discuss the empirical approaches. And the second part, I deal with the results of a quantitative analysis. In other words, I will give you an insight into the quantitative extent of anti-Semitic text messages in German language discourses in which Israel and Jews are mentioned. At the same time, in part 3, I will show you how that means with which techniques anti-Semitic content is disseminated on X. In the fourth part, we will then look at actors, topics, and linguistic characteristics that are particularly relevant in the context of so-called peaks. So that means times where anti-Semitic content appeared and that was disseminated more frequently. And in the fifth part, I will summarize the presentation and lead into the discussion. As mentioned in the beginning, the data material analyzed comes from the Miehling platform X, formerly known as Twitter. And in the course of the presentation, Mr. Mark Neugerschel already referred to it. I will use the term Twitter throughout, as it was known by this name at the time of data collection, and because the platform has also changed in many ways since the name change. The results presented below come from the so-called Twitter Full Archive. It is a API interface that granted access to 100% of all live content on the platform. And in the course of the takeover of the company by tech billionaire Elon Musk, this interface was that was very important for research was unfortunately monetized. So that means that the query um, of around 10 million tweets per month was closed on the one hand, and minimized to 1 million tweets on per month on the other. And it can be accessed, but it costs around $5,000 per month. The composition of the data material is based on two keywords, Israel and Jews. And tweets with the keyword Israel include more than 863,000 text messages from more than 132,000 different users. And tweets with the keyword Jews, over 651,000 text messages from over 117,000 users. The data analysis, which can be seen in the timeline on the right-hand side, extends from the 1st of January 2019 to the 30th of April 2021. And well, after we've talked about the extent of the data material and the scope of the data, I would like to discuss the extent of anti-Semitic content on the platform. And it should be noted that currently no method or procedure is able to actually capture the extent of all of those anti-Semitic contents on the platform. In my analysis, I've already mentioned it, I primarily focused on the analysis of text messages. And with regard to the basic population, I used a specially developed method that recorded 21,000 suspicious text messages in which Israel is mentioned, or of which over 62% can be categorized as anti-Semitic. For the keyword Jews, the number of these text messages is slightly lower at 11,852 text messages, and of these, over 68% can be categorized as anti-Semitic. And if you transfer it to the population as a whole, it can be seen that the proportion of anti-Semitic content in German language discourse from 2019 to 2021 is actually very low at the text language level, at 1.55% for the keyword Israel and 1.24% for the keyword Jews. It's quite low, but if you go beyond the text language language. But if you compare this, for example, with other qualitative studies in which randomized samples were generated, you have a representative sample, just like in a election survey, then you can see that with these studies, there's a higher proportion of anti-Semitic content of around 3 to 5%. What we notice here, why does it vary that much? Because in my analysis, it is mostly about the text level. With qualitative studies, it can also include bimodal levels. So that means text-image relations that can be taken into consideration. Now that we know the extent of anti-Semitic text messages, the question rises as to whether anti-Semitic content has increased in the course of data collection. The proportion of anti-Semitic text messages for the keyword Israel in relation to the population in the year 2019 survey year is 1.55%, then rising to 1.75% in the following year, 2020. Text messages with the keyword Jews had a share of 0.97% in 2019 and a share of 1.73% in the following year, 2020. So it goes to show that in German language discourse in the years 2019-2020, anti-Semitic content has increased on the platform. Furthermore, the chart below shows that the anti-Semitic content spreads in waves on the platform. That means its level is higher at recurring points and different points in time. If we now want to know how this content is disseminated on the platform, so it is also worth taking a look at the different message types. Maybe some of you already know on Twitter the different kind of possibilities on Twitter how to communicate. You have regular tweets, then you have replies, retweets, so spreading existing content, quote and quote and reply. And on the right graph on the right hand side, we can see that anti-Semitic content is most frequently disseminated by retweets in discourse that mention both Israel and Jews. So that means that users multiplied and reproduced their own content or third-party content. And the second most common way in which it is spread is via so-called replies. So that means users respond to existing content that evoked or triggered anti-Semitic reactions. In German language discourse, we are dealing with a user spectrum of several thousand users who regularly make anti-Semitic statements. Over 4,000 different accounts disseminated over 13,000 anti-Semitic text messages on the keyword Israel, which corresponds to an average of around 3.3 text messages per account. And if you contrasted it with the entire population, you see 3.1% of all users who wrote at least one anti-Semitic text messages on Israel. In contrast, 3.42% of all users wrote at least one anti-Semitic text message on the keyword Jews, and I was able to identify over 4,000 different users who wrote more than 8,000 of these text tweets. So on average, this corresponds to around 2 anti-Semitic text messages per account. I've already shown that anti-Semitism spreads in waves. The question that arises, however, is which topics are associated with an increase in anti-Semitic content? As part of my research, I analyzed a total of 6 different peaks. When you take a look at the graph here, you can see the buzzword for Jews on the 1st of January in 2019 we started, and it ends on the 30th of April 2021, and we can see these peaks. They show different kind of aggregations at different points in times. In blue, you can see it for the buzzword of Israel, and we can see here that anti-Semitic content in peak 1 during the so-called Great March of Return. The same applies to Nazi comparison that were circulated as part of a hashtag campaign under the title Nicht ohne mein Kopftuch, which translates to Not Without My Headscarves. And in the following, we will look in particular at 2 waves of dissemination. On the one hand, the recurring increase in anti-Semitic content during the International Holocaust Remembrance Day on the 27th of January. On the other hand, the spread of the hashtag COVID-1948. Mr. Neugerschl, if I remember correctly, he already talked about it a little bit last week. In case you would like to hear more about it, I can just refer back to that presentation. So were these tweets with the hashtag COVID-1948, they were spread at the end of Ramadan 2020, and we're going to talk about it in a little more detail. So and to think about the spread of that hashtag, so my thesis is that this hashtag, especially was circulated in particular by a pro-Iranian online campaign. The campaign took place over a period of 2 weeks, from the 11th of May 2020 to the 24th of May 2020. And the text messages that were disseminated along the hashtag COVID-1948 invariably contain anti-Israel statements, although a large proportion of the text messages during that dissemination period do not directly contain the lexeme Israel. In this context, Monika Schwarz-Friesel also speaks of an Israelization of anti-Semitic semantics, which was often accompanied by anti-Zionist fantasies of annihilation against Israel during that peak. It's interesting to note that a considerable proportion of these text messages can also be traced back to accounts by supporters of the Iranian regime. And according to reports by the Jewish Chronicle and the Community Security Trust, the Iranian regime has already used share networks on the platform in the past to spread anti-Semitic and anti-Israel narratives and influence public opinion in various countries around the world. The empirical results of my investigations confirm these findings and also show that some of the accounts in question have been spreading anti-Jewish content across languages for years, especially on occasions such as the anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel or the end of Ramadan. This becomes particularly clear when looking at the Radar plot here, which shows and reads out the metadata, and it shows that a network of self-proclaimed pro-Iranian users spread this content at high frequency at certain times, for example, between 6 and 8 p.m. German time. If we now look at the linguistic characteristics of this content, we can see that much of it consists of affective hate speech. As an example one, where the writer talks about Zionists are racist Jews who believe that other races are bastards. Or in two, tweets that readapt the original murder legend to current times. And it is striking here that many of these tweets have a strong religious dimension of anti-Semitism, in which the destruction of the Jewish state is legitimized as God's will. What's also striking is that another part of the tweets shows strong parallels to English language content, such as a tweet by what you can see here in example number 4 by Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who directly uses this anti-Semitic hashtag. And it is also very likely that the hashtag campaign was fueled by state actors of the Iranian regime and spread hundreds of thousands of times in different languages on Twitter. Looking at the second peak that I would like to talk about is that it becomes clear that online content is closely intertwined with social and historical events outside of Web 2.0. And many of these tweets were directly related to a speech by German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier during a visit to Israel. And although the following content was not related to a hashtag campaign, it contributed to increased user activity on the occasion of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz and on the occasion of the presentation of the so-called Trump Peace Plan. And this led to an increase in anti-Semitic text messages over several days, which took place between the 27th of January and the 2nd of February 2020. And in the fifth calendar week of the year, I registered a total of 572 anti-Semitic text messages, which in turn was spread by 493 different accounts. At a commemorative event, I've already mentioned it, event to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz at the Yad Vashem Memorial, Steinmeier emphasized that there must be no closure to the past. And this prompted users to make direct reference to the speech by Steinmeier. The speech took around 11 minutes. He started it and ended it in Hebrew. And in example number 1, we can see that users are explicitly aimed at criticizing Steinmeier as an unsuitable federal president. But the implication is that the German people are wrongly described as perpetrators. And according to Monika Schwarz-Friesler and Yehuda Reinhardt, this is a common relativization strategy in the context of post-Holocaust anti-Semitism, which is based on the refusal to emphasize a rejection of the memory towards the victims of the Shoah. Further examples are statements with superlative constructions in which Israel is referentialized at the highest levels of comparison as the most bellicose, most audacious, most derisive, or most ruthless state. And once again, forms of magnification of Jew hatred are frequently evident, which are realized in the form of perpetrator-victim reverse. Like examples of this are statements such as Jews have learned nothing from history, or as in example 4, which features trivializing victim analogies and at the same time reflects the idea that Jews would purposely exploit the Holocaust and therefore their status as victims of the Nazi era. Well, due to the passage of time, I would like to look at other aspects that were not directly related to events that were accompanied by increased spread of anti-Semitic content during a so-called peak. And one user group that I would like to shed light on is the activities of so-called super spreaders. And looking on the graph on the right, it is also clear that these super spreaders predominantly express themselves in the form of anti-Israel messages that explicitly refer to Israel. The communication dynamics of super spreaders are characterized by a high level of interconnectivity. That means the content created and forwarded by super spreaders is largely identical when comparing them to other super spreaders. And in those forwardings by super spreaders, you can often see mentioning each other. So they often mention each other in their own content, and the spread radius of the retweets is usually on the meso level. So that means their community, and it is in a 1 or 2 digit number. Half of the super spreaders are in so-called echo chambers, where only half of them interact in so-called echo chambers. And we take a look at the comment section of these language producers. It shows a clear concentration of identical content, which, however, exhibits a high degree of lexical variation and which almost exclusively confirms the positions of these users and or mutually reinforces them. And to the outside world, this suggests to recipients a homogeneous perspective on that topic. The super spreaders analyzed position themselves predominantly pro-Palestinian, but their main focus is to paint a negative image of Israel, which ostensibly serves the purpose of hate education and use such a process of this content. And much of this content consists of staged propaganda. This content often appears in the form of narratives in connections with the hashtags BDS or Apartheid Israel, and was realized via repetitive statements in connection with the biograms Israel lobby or Hasbara hate speech. And the analysis, the content of the text messages shows that the content disseminated was exclusively anti-Jewish text messages with analogies to apartheid and colonialism vis-a-vis Israel, and depicting the Jewish state as an imitating Nazi regime or in the form of cause for a boycott. A narrative that can be found in the content of the super spreaders are the distinctions between good and real and bad and unjust Jews, which are based on partly racist concepts between Semites and non-Semites. And this myth of a Semitic race whose tradition dates back to the late 18th century originally referred to members of the Semitic language family, with reference to Robert Wistrich and Bernard Lewis. In current anti-Semitic language used by super spreaders, the term is used to defame white Jews who are denied membership of the Jewish people on the basis of geographical, cultural, but mainly unchangeable external markers. And in example number 2, it becomes clear that the memory of the Holocaust serves a purely instrumental purpose and is misused as a basis for compensation in order to draw attention to the miserable living conditions of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And by using the lexeme Hasbara, the language producer implies that the media coverage is directed by the Israeli government. Another narrative that can be found in the contents of the super spreaders are, with reference to example 3, and following Monika Schwarz-Friesel and Yehuda Reinhardt's statements with demands for an end passed on via stereotypes of the Holocaust exploiters. And as a form of expatriate anti-Semitism, Jews in Israel are accused of taking advantages of the Shoah or instrumentalizing it in order to gain financial benefit, solidarity, and international support. The use of the adjectives old, inflated, or disproved figures in example 3 initially articulates a minimization and relativization of the number of victims. And at the same time, the responsibility for the Holocaust is shifted from the perpetrators to the victims, and Germany is perspectivized as the victim of an alleged hate reaction, whereas the repeated emphasis on German payments implies a desire for closure on the one hand and accusations for money extortion on the other. And a final pattern that I would like to briefly discuss, and that occurs particularly frequently in the content of the most active super spreaders, are statements such as those in that are accompanied by a refusal of the emphasis of the victims of the Shoah and are realized coupled with Nazi analogies such as the referencization style Nazis. This brings me to my conclusion. First of all, I have shown that anti-Semitic content is increasing over the course of 2019 and 2020, and that those contents are spreading in a wave-like manner. Secondly, I showed that the increased dissemination of anti-Semitic content is fueled by retweets, amongst other things. And thirdly, that is also initiated as part of coordinated campaigns for example, by the Iranian regime. And the primary projection surface of anti Semitic language producers is the Jewish state. Fifthly, it became clear that platforms such as Twitter, which reflect conversations in the digital mainstream, also contain a high proportion of effectively communicated hate speech in German language discourse. And finally, it became clear that some of this content is disseminated by users who have been active on the platform for many years and who will constantly spread anti Semitic content, um, and, and generate that content without any noticeable restrictions on the platform. They're still active on the platform. And this is the end of my presentation, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Okay, Daniel, thank you very much for this very exciting presentation. You now have the opportunity to ask questions. If you'd like to do that, you can switch on your camera and raise your hand. So just I do have a few questions here in the chat. We have a question by Prof. Shua. He wants to know, using the data material, which kind of languages were used, when understood it was only German language tweets that used. That is correct. The data material was from the Twitter full archive, and the Twitter full archive made it possible to have settings and choose the language, so that with a very high likelihood you can only get the language you wanted. In my case, it was German. I also have to say that none of these technical tools is perfect, so you would still get mixed content and mixed from different languages, but the proportion of those mixed tweets is low. So Daniel talked about it in the summary. I still want to ask about it because I think that this is a very important point here. The material, or the material that you looked at under the term of the Israel, is it higher? Does it contain more anti-Semitic content than those that use the word Jew? Make it talk about that. So in general, it showed that tweets using the buzzword Israel, or the hashtag Israel, in relation to the population, so all of the existing tweets, it is higher than those that include the word Jews. And more often they're more anti-Semitic, but in general, the tweets that look like you still have a certain proportion of what I call wrong positive material. So what actually turned out to be anti-Semitic from those suspicious content that you've limited, it actually was higher for those contents that use the hashtag choose. But generally, it goes to show that, well, of course, you have a very high proportion of effective hate speech on the platform. We've got a lot of vulgar expressions for both buzzwords, but still Israel is in the communication, and the word Israel is used a lot more to realize anti-Semitic content, but not explicitly talk about Jews. So would you say that this Israel-related discourse, or your research, points to the fact that the Israel-related discourse has a bigger, plays a bigger role in the dissemination of anti-Semitic than those using the word Jew? Yes, in German language content, for sure. When people talk about Jews on the platform, it is usually in the context of the Shoah, of commemoration culture, about Jewish public holidays. So it's usually positive. It's actually more difficult. There is a lot of anti-Semitism on the platform, of course, but you have to say that it is especially those tweets that talk about commemorative culture, that usually positive, but there are a lot of tweets by, for example, politicians who want to um, talk about Jews on the occasion of public holidays. This is usually it makes up the majority of the generated content. But what we can see within the framework of the BuzzFeed Jews, but also I've mentioned it before when it comes to the hashtag of 19 COVID-19 48. But these tweets that we see is usually like contain fantasies of annihilation towards Israel, but Israel is not always explicitly mentioned in that discourse. And this is a speciality that we can see with the hashtag COVID-19 48. But in general, you have to say, or you can say actually, that Israel is the primary projection surface for anti-Semitism. Okay, thank Dan. Thanks, Daniel. If you have questions, you can switch on your camera. You can raise your hands. I can't see any raised hands at the moment. I'm just going to take a look at the chat. If there are no questions, maybe I missed someone by accident, but please let me know. I do have more questions actually. So you use the buzzwords of Jews and Israel, but there are of course other kind of terms that are used to communicate anti-Semitism. You talked about Nazis, and these kind of terms are being used, or Zionistic world conspiracy, or about Zionist devils. And so these are terms that are being used in order to spread anti-Semitic content. Did you have any kind of, or did your research find anything out about that? Do you have any kind of speculations about other terms that go beyond these two that you just looked at? Well, of course, it's always, well, how should I put it? With these two terms, you have a little selection of a lot of tweets. Globalist is one of these classical words that can have an anti-Semitic part, but it doesn't have to be. It's very difficult because to use more terms, because you have generate a huge data mass that you cannot actually take a look at, or make precise statements about them. There are of course a lot of code words that are being used in order to realize anti-Semitism, but what becomes very clear is that what you have to mention and say as well, that this platform is at the time that I looked at this archive and had access to that archive, at least I tried to find content and actually this kind of content it was actually pre-filtered by Twitter. They tried to take that some of these tweets down. So what we were able to see was the tweets that remained. And when you take a look at the platform now, you only have to do a little test yourself to find out what the policy is, how Twitter themselves deals with anti-Semitism. I use those two hashtags and looked for classical anti-Semitic stereotypes with about Jews with a certain physiognomy. They were retweeted hundreds of times. If you report it to the platform now, the result is the following. Well, the platform does not delete the content. So the feedback by Twitter was, after I reported tweets with the hashtag Israel New Nazi and a caricature and an anti-Semitic caricature, the reply by by X was that the user who created that content does not infringe on the platform's policy. So this change has become more evident, and anti-Semitism has become more evident after the name change. And therefore, I'd say that from what I can see and what I showed you in the data, we have to assume that probably we have 10 times as many tweets like that. It's a very important point. I just want to summarize it, and I just want you to confirm whether I understood it correctly. That you said on Twitter, before it was called X, there was a relative effective control that pre-filtered the relevant data material, and this control, at the time that it is turned into X, it actually got worse. That's exactly what I would say. That's my thesis. Yes. So it also means that for your data and the anti-Semitic tweets that were posted were actually bigger than those that you actually saw, because there were in many cases they were deleted immediately. So those people who write anti-Semitic tweets should actually be higher than what you actually saw. Yes, that's correct. It was actually very easy to check that. You could query certain number of certain tweets for a certain year. We want all tweets for the year 2019 with the hashtag choose. So you get a list of tweets that exist in German. So you can click on the tweets, but when you take a closer look at the data material, it's actually there are less tweets there, because by sending the query to the system, a system actually gives you information that there's, for example, 1 million tweets. What you actually see in the archive or makes accessible is actually less in the end. And Twitter at a certain point in time, I think it was at the end of around the end of 2020, in their metadata, they have a new parameter that's called biased. And this bias parameter is an indicator for when you take a look at the data, that at least, well, on a emotive level, this tweet seems a bit little strange, but it's not an indicator that says that it is anti-Semitic, but it could be, for instance, also be the case that the user complained about a different user who states anti-Semitic content, and they want to give some want to emphasize that they're against that. That's just one note from my side. Of course, it's a little indicator that Twitter themselves try to do pre-selections, but I'd say in the course of the change of the platform in many different aspects, not just the name, I think that's no longer the case with the pre-filter. We've got a question by Claudia Ubler. On which other platforms or communication data could you also apply this method in order to detect anti-Semitism? So beyond this study, I also worked a lot on Telegram, and it doesn't work like that, where you can just have a buzzword just as choose or Israel, and I just I query everything that mentions these buzzwords, but that doesn't work like that. I use that method in right-wing chat groups to find out everything about what they say about Israel, Jews, Zionism, anything about conspiracy theories, and try to filter that, and then use an automated method to classify these statements. But actually, when you really want to learn something about that and find something out, whether it's anti-Semitic or not, you actually have to take a look at it on a qualitative level. but this we have to take a look at the databases. Um, when databases are mixed, when you don't quite know what this is about, you can get some access to relevant text structures. That's a big advantage that exists with all four platforms, such as Web 2.2, Discord. Would be a platform where you can apply that method. Everything where you don't have a opportunity to actually get data and have data pre-selected by the platform itself. Okay, any other questions? All right. I think I didn't miss anyone who wanted to ask a question. All right, I don't see any reaction. All right, so Daniel, um, thank you very, very much for this really good presentation. And um, I hope you were successful when you defend your thesis. I think you convinced us tonight. I also like to thank our interpreter, Ms. Michaela Bertsch, who has already also been interpreting the past few sessions and probably going to be with us in the next few sessions. Well, thank you very much thank you very much to all of our participants. And also I'd like to note, as I mentioned, I mentioned it before, we still have places left at the summer camp at ISGAP. We've got more information on our website. Next week we have Maiten Umbach in our next online seminar. Professor Umbach is a professor at the University of Nottingham. She's going to talk about the development of iconography of anti-Semitism. These ideas are often used to be the case in the past. Anti-Semitism is spread via images and photographs, and the way how photos are being taken and how selectively these scenes are shown in these photographs. Professor Urbach is going to talk about that. We're looking forward to seeing you again then. Thank you once again to Ishadeh Abraha and Daphne Kleiman, who were in charge of organizing that at ISGAP. And thank you very much to you, Daniel, once again. And then I'd like to say goodbye, and I am looking forward to seeing as many as possible of you at the next session next week. Thank you very much.